God intoxicated state. Yet this was only a foretaste of the intense experiences to come. The first glimpse of the Divine Mother made him the more eager for her uninterrupted vision. He wanted to see her both in meditation and with eyes open. But the mother began to play a teasing game of hide and seek with him, intensifying both his joy and his suffering. Weeping bitterly during the moments of separation from her, he would pass into a trance and then find her standing before him, smiling, talking, consoling, bidding him be of good cheer, and instructing him. During this period of spiritual practice, he had many uncommon experiences. When he sat to meditate, he would hear strange clicking sounds in the joints of his legs, as if someone were locking them up, one after the other, to keep him motionless. And at the conclusion of his meditation, he would again hear the same sounds, this time unlocking them and leaving him free to move about. He would see flashes like a swarm of fireflies floating before his eyes, or a sea of deep mist around him, with luminous waves of molten silver. Again, from a sea of translucent mist, he would behold the mother rising, first her feet, then her waist, body, face, and head, finally her whole person. He would feel her breath and hear her voice. Worshipping in the temple, sometimes he would become exalted, sometimes he would remain motionless as stone, sometimes he would almost collapse from excessive emotion. Many of his actions, contrary to all tradition, seemed sacrilegious to the people. He would take a flower and touch it to his own head, body, and feet, and then offer it to the goddess. Or like a drunkard, he would reel to the throne of the mother, touch her chin by way of showing his affection for her, and sing, talk, joke, laugh, and dance. Or he would take a morsel of food from the plate and hold it to her mouth, begging her to eat it, and would not be satisfied till he was convinced that she had really eaten. After the mother had been put to sleep at night, from his own room he would hear her ascending to the upper story of the temple with the light steps of a happy girl, her anklets jingling. Then he would discover her standing with flowing hair, her black form silhouetted against the sky of the night, looking at the Ganges or at the distant lights of Calcutta. Naturally, the temple officials took him for an insane person. His worldly well-wishers brought him to skilled physicians, but no medicine could cure his malady. Many a time he doubted his sanity himself, for he had been sailing across an uncharted sea with no earthly guide to direct him. His only haven of security was the Divine Mother herself. To her he would pray, "I do not know what these things are. I am ignorant of mantras and the scriptures. Teach me, Mother, how to realize thee. Who else can help me? Art thou not my only refuge and guide?" And the sustaining presence of the mother never failed him in his distress or doubt. Even those who criticized his conduct were greatly impressed with his purity, guilelessness, truthfulness, integrity, and holiness. They felt an uplifting influence in his presence. It is said that samadhi or trance no more than opens the portal of the spiritual realm. Sri Ramakrishna felt an unquenchable desire to enjoy God in various ways. For his meditation, he built a place in the northern wooded section of the temple garden. With Hriday's help, he planted there 5 sacred trees. The spot, known as the Panchavati, became the scene of many of his visions. As his spiritual mood deepened, he more and more felt himself to be a child of the Divine Mother. He learnt to surrender himself completely to her will and let her direct him. "O Mother," he would constantly pray, "I have taken refuge in thee. Teach me what to do and what to say. Thy will is paramount everywhere and is for the good of thy children. Merge my will in thy will and make me thy instrument." His visions became deeper and more intimate. He no longer had to meditate to behold the Divine Mother. Even while retaining consciousness of the outer world, he would see her as tangibly as the temples, the trees, the river, and the men around him. On a certain occasion, Mathur Babu stealthily entered the temple to watch the worship. He was profoundly moved by the young priest's devotion and sincerity. He realized that Sri Ramakrishna had transformed the stone image into the living goddess. Sri Ramakrishna one day fed a cat with the food that was to be offered to Kali. This was too much for the manager of the temple garden, who considered himself responsible for the proper conduct of the worship. He reported Sri Ramakrishna's insane behavior to Mathur Babu. Sri Ramakrishna has described the incident. The Divine Mother revealed to me in the Kali temple that it was she who had become everything. She showed me that everything was full of consciousness. The image was consciousness, the altar was consciousness, the water vessels were consciousness, the doorsill was consciousness, the marble floor was consciousness, all was consciousness. I found everything inside the room soaked, as it were, in bliss, the bliss of God. I saw a wicked man in front of the Kali temple, but in him also I saw the power of the Divine Mother vibrating. That was why I fed a cat with the food that was to be offered to the Divine Mother. I clearly perceived that all this was the Divine Mother, even the cat. The manager of the temple garden wrote to Mathur Babu saying that I was feeding the cat with the offering intended for the Divine Mother. But Mathur Babu had insight into the state of my mind. He wrote back to the manager, "Let him do whatever he likes. You must not say anything to him." One of the painful ailments from which Sri Ramakrishna suffered at this time was a burning sensation in his body, and he was cured by a strange vision. During worship in the temple, following the scriptural injunctions, he would imagine the presence of the sinner in himself and the destruction of this sinner. One day he was meditating in the Panchavati when he saw come out of him a red-eyed man of black complexion, reeling like a drunkard. Soon there emerged from him another person of serene countenance, wearing the ochre cloth of a sannyasi and carrying in his hand a trident. The second person attacked the first and killed him with the trident. Thereafter, Sri Ramakrishna was free of his pain. About this time, he began to worship God by assuming the attitude of a servant towards his master. He imitated the mood of Hanuman, the monkey chieftain of the Ramayana, the ideal servant of Rama, and traditional model for this self-effacing form of devotion. When he meditated on Hanuman, his movements and his way of life began to resemble those of a monkey. His eyes became restless. He lived on fruits and roots. With his cloth tied around his waist, a portion of it hanging in the form of a tail, he jumped from place to place instead of walking. And after a short while, he was blessed with a vision of Sita, the divine consort of Rama, who entered his body and disappeared there with the words, "I bequeath to you my smile." Mathur had faith in the sincerity of Sri Ramakrishna's spiritual zeal, but began now to doubt his sanity. He had watched him jumping about like a monkey. One day, when Rani Rasmani was listening to Sri Ramakrishna singing in the temple, the young priest abruptly turned and slapped her. Apparently, listening to his song, she had actually been thinking of a lawsuit. She accepted the punishment as though the Divine Mother herself had imposed it, but Mathur was distressed. He begged Sri Ramakrishna to keep his feelings under control and to heed the conventions of society. God himself, he argued, follows laws. God never permitted, for instance, flowers of two colors to grow on the same stalk. The following day, Sri Ramakrishna presented Mathur Babu with two hibiscus flowers growing on the same stalk, one red and one white. Mathur and Rani Rasmani began to ascribe the mental ailment of Sri Ramakrishna in part, at least, to his observance of rigid continence. Thinking that a natural life would relax the tension of his nerves, they engineered a plan with two women of ill fame. But as soon as the women entered his room, Sri Ramakrishna beheld in them the manifestation of the Divine Mother of the universe and went into samadhi, uttering her name. Haladhari. In 1858, there came to Dakshineshwar a cousin of Sri Ramakrishna, Haladhari by name, who was to remain there about 8 years. On account of Sri Ramakrishna's indifferent health, Mathur appointed this man to the office of priest in the Kali temple. He was a complex character, versed in the letter of the scriptures, but hardly aware of their spirit. He loved to participate in hair-splitting theological discussions, and by the measure of his own erudition, he proceeded to gauge Sri Ramakrishna. An orthodox Brahmin, he thoroughly disapproved of his cousin's unorthodox actions. But he was not unimpressed by Sri Ramakrishna's purity of life, ecstatic love of God, and yearning for realization. One day, Haladhari upset Sri Ramakrishna with the statement that God is incomprehensible to the human mind. Sri Ramakrishna has described the great moment of doubt when he wondered whether his visions had really misled him. With sobs, I prayed to the mother, "Canst thou have the heart to deceive me like this because I am a fool?" A stream of tears flowed from my eyes. Shortly afterwards, I saw a volume of mist rising from the floor and filling the space before me. In the midst of it, there appeared a face with flowing beard, calm, highly expressive, and fair. Fixing its gaze steadily upon me, it said solemnly, "Remain in Bhavamukha, on the threshold of relative consciousness." This it repeated 3 times, and then it gently disappeared in the mist, which itself dissolved. This vision reassured me. A garbled report of Sri Ramakrishna's failing health, indifference to worldly life, and various abnormal activities reached Kamarpukar and filled the heart of his poor mother with anguish. At her repeated request, he returned to his village for a change of air. But his boyhood friends did not interest him any more. A divine fever was consuming him. He spent a great part of the day and night in one of the cremation grounds, in meditation. The place reminded him of the impermanence of the human body, of human hopes and achievements. It also reminded him of Kali, the goddess of destruction. Marriage and after. But in a few months his health showed improvement, and he recovered to some extent his natural buoyancy of spirit. His happy mother was encouraged to think it might be a good time to arrange his marriage. The boy was now 23 years old. A wife would bring him back to earth, and she was delighted when her son welcomed her suggestion. Perhaps he saw in it the finger of God. Sarada Mani, a little girl of 5, lived in the neighboring village of Jairambati. Even at this age, she had been praying to God to make her character as stainless and fragrant as the white tuberose. Looking at the full moon, she would say, "O God, there are dark spots even on the moon, but make my character spotless." It was she who was selected as the bride for Sri Ramakrishna. The marriage ceremony was duly performed. Such early marriage in India is in the nature of a betrothal, the marriage being consummated when the girl attains puberty. But in this case, the marriage remained forever unconsummated. Sri Ramakrishna lived at Kamarpukar about a year and a half and then returned to Dakshineshwar. Hardly had he crossed the threshold of the Kali temple when he found himself again in the whirlwind. His madness reappeared tenfold. The same meditation and prayer, the same ecstatic moods, the same burning sensation, the same weeping, the same sleeplessness, the same indifference to the body and the outside world, the same divine delirium. He subjected himself to fresh disciplines in order to eradicate greed and lust, the two great impediments to spiritual progress. With a rupee in one hand and some earth in the other, he would reflect on the comparative value of these two for the realization of God, and finding them equally worthless, he would toss them with equal indifference into the Ganges. Women he regarded as the manifestations of the Divine Mother. Never even in a dream did he feel the impulses of lust. And to root out of his mind the idea of caste superiority, he cleaned a Parya's house with his long and neglected hair. When he would sit in meditation, birds would perch on his head and peck in his hair for grains of food. Snakes would crawl over his body, and neither would be aware of the other. Sleep left him altogether. Day and night, visions flitted before him. He saw the sannyasi who had previously killed the sinner in him again coming out of his body, threatening him with the trident and ordering him to concentrate on God. Or the same sannyasi would visit distant places, following a luminous path and bringing him reports of what was happening there. Sri Ramakrishna used to say later that in the case of an advanced devotee, the mind itself becomes the guru, living and moving like an embodied being. Rani Rasmani, the foundress of the temple garden, passed away in 1861. After her death, her son-in-law, Mathur, became the sole executor of the estate. He placed himself and his resources at the disposal of Sri Ramakrishna and began to look after his physical comfort. Sri Ramakrishna later spoke of him as one of his 5 suppliers of stores appointed by the Divine Mother. Whenever a desire arose in his mind, Mathur fulfilled it without hesitation. The Brahmani. There came to Dakshineshwar at this time a Brahmin woman who was to play an important part in Sri Ramakrishna's spiritual unfoldment. Born in East Bengal, she was an adept in the Tantric and Vaishnava methods of worship. She was slightly over 50 years of age, handsome, and garbed in the orange robe of a nun. Her sole possessions were a few books and 2 pieces of wearing cloth. Sri Ramakrishna welcomed the visitor with great respect, described to her his experiences and visions, and told her of people's belief that these were symptoms of madness. She listened to him attentively and said, "My son, everyone in this world is mad. Some are mad for money, some for creature comforts, some for name and fame, and you are mad for God." She assured him that he was passing through the almost unknown spiritual experience described in the scriptures as Mahabhava, the most exalted rapture of divine love. She told him that this extreme exaltation had been described as manifesting itself through 19 physical symptoms, including the shedding of tears, a tremor of the body, horripilation, perspiration, and a burning sensation. The Bhakti scriptures, she declared, had recorded only 2 instances of the experience, namely those of Sri Radha and Sri Chaitanya. Very soon, a tender relationship sprang up between Sri Ramakrishna and the Brahmani, she looking upon him as the baby Krishna and he upon her as mother. Day after day, she watched his ecstasy during the kirtan and meditation, his samadhi, his mad yearning, and she recognized in him a power to transmit spirituality to others. She came to the conclusion that such things were not possible for an ordinary devotee, not even for a highly developed soul. Only an incarnation of God was capable of such spiritual manifestations. She proclaimed openly that Sri Ramakrishna, like Sri Chaitanya, was an incarnation of God. When Sri Ramakrishna told Mathur what the Brahmani had said about him, Mathur shook his head in doubt. He was reluctant to accept him as an incarnation of God, an avatar comparable to Rama, Krishna, Buddha, and Chaitanya, though he admitted Sri Ramakrishna's extraordinary spirituality. Whereupon the Brahmani asked Mathur to arrange a conference of scholars who should discuss the matter with her. He agreed to the proposal and the meeting was arranged. It was to be held in the Nat Mandir in front of the Kali temple. 2 famous Pandits of the time were invited: Vaishnav Charan, the leader of the Vaishnava society, and Gauri. The first to arrive was Vaishnav Charan, with a distinguished company of scholars and devotees. The Brahmani, like a proud mother, proclaimed her view before him and supported it with quotations from the scriptures. As the Pandits discussed the deep theological question, Sri Ramakrishna, perfectly indifferent to everything happening around him, sat in their midst like a child, immersed in his own thoughts, sometimes smiling, sometimes chewing a pinch of spices from a pouch, or again saying to Vaishnav Charan with a nudge, "Look here, sometimes I feel like this too." Presently, Vaishnav Charan arose to declare himself in total agreement with the view of the Brahmani. He declared that Sri Ramakrishna had undoubtedly experienced Mahabhava, and that this was the certain sign of the rare manifestation of God in a man. The people assembled there, especially the officers of the temple garden, were struck dumb. Sri Ramakrishna said to Mathur, like a boy, "Just fancy, he too says so. Well, I am glad to learn that after all, it is not a disease." When a few days later Pandit Gauri arrived, another meeting was held, and he agreed with the view of the Brahmani and Vaishnav Charan. To Sri Ramakrishna's remark that Vaishnav Charan had declared him to be an avatar, Gauri replied, "Is that all he has to say about you? Then he has said very little. I am fully convinced that you are that mine of spiritual power, only a small fraction of which descends on earth from time to time in the form of an incarnation." "Ah," said Sri Ramakrishna with a smile, "you seem to have quite outbid Vaishnav Charan in this matter. What have you found in me that makes you entertain such an idea?" Gauri said. I feel it in my heart, and I have the scriptures on my side. I am ready to prove it to anyone who challenges me. Well, Sri Ramakrishna said, it is you who say so, but believe me, I know nothing about it. Thus, the insane priest was, by verdict of the great scholars of the day, proclaimed a divine incarnation. His visions were not the result of an overheated brain. They had precedent in spiritual history. And how did the proclamation affect Sri Ramakrishna himself? He remained the simple child of the mother that he had been since the first day of his life. Years later, when two of his householder disciples openly spoke of him as a divine incarnation and the matter was reported to him, he said with a touch of sarcasm, do they think they will enhance my glory that way? One of them is an actor on the stage and the other a physician. What do they know about incarnations? Why, years ago, Pandits like Gauri and Vaishnav Charan declared me to be an avatar. They were great scholars and knew what they said, but that did not make any change in my mind. Sri Ramakrishna was a learner all his life. He often used to quote a proverb to his disciples. Friend, the more I live, the more I learn. When the excitement created by the Brahmani's declaration was over, he set himself to the task of practicing spiritual disciplines according to the traditional methods laid down in the Tantra and Vaishnava scriptures. Hitherto, he had pursued his spiritual ideal according to the promptings of his own mind and heart. Now he accepted the Brahmani as his guru and set foot on the traditional highways. Tantra. According to the Tantra, the ultimate reality is Chit or consciousness, which is identical with Sat or being and with Ananda or bliss. This ultimate reality, Sat Chit Ananda, existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute, is identical with the reality preached in the Vedas. And man is identical with this reality, but under the influence of Maya or illusion, he has forgotten his true nature. He takes to be real a merely apparent world of subject and object, and this error is the cause of his bondage and suffering. The goal of spiritual discipline is the rediscovery of his true identity with the divine reality. For the achievement of this goal, the Vedanta prescribes an austere negative method of discrimination and renunciation, which can be followed by only a few individuals endowed with sharp intelligence and unshakable willpower. But Tantra takes into consideration the natural weakness of human beings, their lower appetites, and their love for the concrete. It combines philosophy with rituals, meditation with ceremonies, renunciation with enjoyment. The underlying purpose is gradually to train the aspirant to meditate on his identity with the ultimate. The average man wishes to enjoy the material objects of the world. Tantra bids him enjoy these, but at the same time discover in them the presence of God. Mystical rites are prescribed by which slowly the sense objects become spiritualized and sense attraction is transformed into a love of God. So the very bonds of man are turned into releasers. The very poison that kills is transmuted into the elixir of life. Outward renunciation is not necessary. Thus, the aim of Tantra is to sublimate bhoga or enjoyment into yoga or union with consciousness. For according to this philosophy, the world with all its manifestations is nothing but the sport of Shiva and Shakti, the Absolute and its inscrutable power. The disciplines of Tantra are graded to suit aspirants of all degrees. Exercises are prescribed for people with animal, heroic, and divine outlooks. Certain of the rites require the presence of members of the opposite sex. Here the aspirant learns to look on woman as the embodiment of the goddess Kali, the mother of the universe. The very basis of Tantra is the motherhood of God and the glorification of woman. Every part of a woman's body is to be regarded as incarnate divinity. But the rites are extremely dangerous. The help of a qualified guru is absolutely necessary. An unwary devotee may lose his foothold and fall into a pit of depravity. According to the Tantra, Shakti is the active creative force in the universe. Shiva, the Absolute, is a more or less passive principle. Further, Shakti is as inseparable from Shiva as fire's power to burn is from fire itself. Shakti, the creative power, contains in its womb the universe and therefore is the Divine Mother. All women are her symbols. Kali is one of her several forms. The meditation on Kali, the creative power, is the central discipline of the Tantra. While meditating, the aspirant at first regards himself as one with the Absolute, and then thinks that out of that impersonal consciousness emerge two entities, namely, his own self and the living form of the goddess. He then projects the goddess into the tangible image before him and worships it as the Divine Mother. Sri Ramakrishna set himself to the task of practicing the disciplines of Tantra, and at the bidding of the Divine Mother herself, he accepted the Brahmani as his guru. He performed profound and delicate ceremonies in the Panchavati and under the Bale tree at the northern extremity of the temple compound. He practiced all the disciplines of the 64 principal Tantra books, and it took him never more than 3 days to achieve the result promised in any one of them. After the observance of a few preliminary rites, he would be overwhelmed with a strange divine fervor and would go into samadhi, where his mind would dwell in exaltation. Evil ceased to exist for him. The word carnal lost its meaning. The whole world and everything in it appeared as the Leela, the sport, of Shiva and Shakti. He beheld everywhere manifest the power and beauty of the Mother. The whole world, animate and inanimate, appeared to him as pervaded with Chit, consciousness, and with Ananda, bliss. He saw in a vision the ultimate cause of the universe as a huge luminous triangle giving birth every moment to an infinite number of worlds. He heard the Anahata Shabda, the great sound Om, of which the innumerable sounds of the universe are only so many echoes. He acquired the 8 supernatural powers of yoga, which make a man almost omnipotent, and these he spurned as of no value whatsoever to the spirit. He had a vision of the divine Maya, the inscrutable power of God, by which the universe is created and sustained, and into which it is finally absorbed. In this vision, he saw a woman of exquisite beauty, about to become a mother, emerging from the Ganges and slowly approaching the Panchavati. Presently, she gave birth to a child and began to nurse it tenderly. A moment later, she assumed a terrible aspect, seized the child with her grim jaws, and crushed it. Swallowing it, she re-entered the waters of the Ganges. But the most remarkable experience during this period was the awakening of the Kundalini Shakti, the serpent power. He actually saw the power, at first lying asleep at the bottom of the spinal column, then waking up and ascending along the mystic Sushumna canal and through its 6 centers or lotuses to the Sahasrara, the 1,000-petaled lotus in the top of the head. He further saw that as the Kundalini went upward, the different lotuses bloomed, and this phenomenon was accompanied by visions and trances. Later on, he described to his disciples and devotees the various movements of the Kundalini, the fish-like, bird-like, monkey-like, and so on. The awakening of the Kundalini is the beginning of spiritual consciousness, and its union with Shiva in the Sahasrara, ending in Samadhi, is the consummation of the Tantric disciplines. About this time it was revealed to him that in a short while many devotees would seek his guidance. Vaishnava